Exchange, an act relating to bills of exchange, cheques and promissory notes. It was assented on the 13th of December 1909 and it was proclaimed to commence on the 1st of February 1910. And I'll just read a brief passage from the bills of exchange which highlights exactly, in its own words, what it is. So the form and interpretation, which is section 8 of the Bill of Exchange Act, and it states part subsection 1. A bill of exchange is an unconditional order in writing. Remember, unconditional. Addressed by one person to another, signed by the person giving it, requiring the person to whom it is addressed to pay on demand, or at a fixed or determinable future time, a sum certain in money, to or to the order of a specified person or to bearer. Now, note what I mentioned there before is signed by the person giving it. I dare anyone to look at every bill that's come through their mailbox where it was signed by the biller. That tells you it's not a bill. It's not a true bill. It's merely a statement, an express trust contract, making an offer for you to accept. You have two choices there. You can decline the offer, don't accept or consent to contract. Or you do a BOE on it as the beneficiary, benefactor, for, on behalf of the addressee. Their creation, their fiction, from your birth certificate. So to understand the more details of bills of exchange, one needs to understand how it was established and for what purpose. Now, briefly, in 1966, in our country, the government removed our silver-backed pound sterling. By doing so, they used the American greenbank as its security. Unfortunately, what they didn't tell you is that the American greenbank and America has been trading bankrupt since 1933. So some of you have already cottoned on to the fact that, hang on a second, if we've gone from silver-backed currency to a bankrupt currency, then we have no currency. So the actual tender being used in this country is 100% promissory notes and bills of exchange. How do you recognise a bill of exchange and promissory note from your everyday existence? Okay, I'll go through a few examples. Some of us who are old enough may remember we owned a checkbook. That checkbook is a promissory note. It's a certificate or a document that allows you to instruct your bank to pay the biller when they deposit that cheque in their bank account. Their bank will then contact your bank, and using that cheque, it's a promissory note. It's a promise to pay. So your bank will then transfer funds to their bank, and then they have received those funds into deposit. That's just a bank. That's just in relation to a cheque. Another one is a bill. When you receive a bill in the mail, and it doesn't matter who's sending you the bill. That's a promise. That is an offer to accept. That offer to accept is what they call an express trust contract. It's a contract they're sending you, requesting, if you may, if you please, pay the dollar amount on that bill. It's not a true bill. It's a statement. So it's not actually a bill, it's a statement. So what we do is you, to endorse that money, the amount they're seeking, the bill of exchange, section 20 and 22, the minimum requirement is a signature. What we've been teaching is we go that little extra mile and we give them the amount, we put an extra little spiel on there, so we educate them to accept your signature bill. So what currency are we using now today? Well, we're certainly not using real cash, real gold and silver backed currency. What we're doing is actually a commerce transaction using bills of exchange and promissory notes. Similar to the $10, $20, $50 note, $100 note that you would probably normally carry, or even the coins that you normally carry in your pocket to exchange, and that's what we deemed as cash. This is what they've trained us to believe is actual cash. What in fact it is, a $50 note is just short for a $50 promissory note. The value of that note, like all other combination of notes and coins, only has intrinsic value if the receiver of that note accepts it as payment. Then that's the only value that it has. So we understand what a promissory note is. We've discussed the notes in your pocket. We've discussed checks, checkbooks. We've discussed coins. Let's look more closely at an express trust contract. What is one of those? It's a bill. It can be any kind of bill demanding money. And we'll focus on infringement notices, which seems to be the most popular that most people receive, and unwarranted receiving. When we look closely at a bill, the key indicators, and using a fine, for example, a speeding fine. First of all, the biller, that statement, the creator of that non-true bill, the statement, has a corporation logo, has a corporation ABN, Australian business number. It created a debt against the addressee. If you look carefully at the name and the address they use to mail that statement, that's not you. That's a public trust. That's a corporation, trust person that they created from a birth certificate, fraudulently created, and deceived, and your mother deceived when she signed it, and your father, who was party to it as well. That is a trust that they created, and from that moment on, everything you pay, everything they bill you for, every time you acknowledge that name, the capital name, the full surname, it can be lowercase, but if they use the surname in full, your first, middle, surname, they are referring to that public trust that they created by deception. Getting back to the bill, or the posted contract offer, which can be declined. Remember, you're not the name on the paperwork. You have no obligation by law to pay someone else's bill, let alone identify yourself as that entity that they've addressed to. So talking about the statement again, the bill that comes in the mail is usually 99% of the time, the biller will never sign. Will never sign it and never put their full name to it. And the reason that is because they're doing it with non-clean hands. They don't want to put themselves at risk of perjury. For presenting something through the mail, which by the way is a crime, for monetary gain by deception is actually fraud. And that's pretty much nearly every piece of mail you receive through your mailbox. It's a document fraudulently created to entice you to pay. They have educated us throughout our whole lives, from childhood through to adulthood, to believe that they're the government, to make us believe that everything they stick under our nose we have to sign, because the entity that is being built is us. They want us to believe it's us. And that is the fraud in nearly everything they have us living by. Now, unfortunately, for them, the fraud's now exposed, and more people are now actively using the bill of exchange and promissory notes to settle and discharge the debt, because no one can pay a debt. There's no real currency to pay anything. It's impossible to pay a bill. That's just the language they want you to believe, because when you use that wrong language, you're accountable. To them, it makes it sound like that you're avoiding to pay your responsibility. In fact, there is no responsibility. They didn't bill you. You're not obligated to pay someone else's bill. So with a statement, when you receive it, and we use the traffic fine as an example, there's a lot of information in that document that raises a lot of questions. And before you pay that document, you need to ask those questions and have them verified, provide proof or evidence that one, the entity they address that bill to is you. The natural man or woman are one and the same as the entity they've addressed the bill to. Another question would be asking for the name of the man or woman representative of the biller, in case you have a liability issue and you can make civil claim for damages, trespass. Thirdly, under law, or under rule of law, even in their legalese, you can't be, all fines and statements are null and void, subject to conviction, if they're using threat with enforcement, demanding money with menace, by using a deception for monetary gain. Those things automatically discharge, by default, discharge and settle the debt, because no one can force you to pay someone else's bill. No one can even force you to pay a bill. There has to be a contract agreement between the two parties, and if there is none, and the contract is perceived as being a contract by them, by tacit agreement, it's not acceptable if they use threat with enforcement, demanding money with menace. And that's the key in everything that they have made us believe as being the reality in their fictional world. So, you may have heard me mention a few times, who are we, who are you, and who are they? Well, the bottom line is, you're a natural man and woman. You're God's creation. If you look under the statute of the Constitution, 1901, we're royal subjects. We are not Australian citizens. An Australian citizen is a fiction. They use that language as a citizen to establish or to educate us or brainwash us, depending on how you want to refer to it, to believe that we are their slave. We are being enslaved and governed by a tyrannical entity that is a foreign registered entity. They are not our government. They're not our politicians. They're not our courts. They're not our judges. They're not our police. We are at sea, ruled by maritime law, but they've established it on the land so that everything you take for granted is their property. We are crew members of their ship. We are slaves on their ship. And everything you own, you believe you own, the car, the money in your bank account, your superannuation, your wages you receive are taxed. This is made possible because you're a slave in their eyes. In their creation, they've made another dimension that runs parallel with reality, and they've dumbed us down to the point to believe that they know what they're doing, and they certainly do, but not in a good way. And we've seen that recently over the last few years as to what extent they will go to ensure that we don't have any rights, we don't have any choices, we don't have any freedom of speech. And that applies to bills, because what happens to you if you don't pay a bill? They come after you pretty hard, don't they? They make you feel like you're guilty before you're proven innocent. They use their court system, because it's not ours. It doesn't even look like anything that's written in the Constitution. So they're not our court system. They're using their system to pretty much steal from you every which way they can, so that you remain poor, so that your wife has to have a full-time job. Sometimes you even have to have a second job just to make ends meet. Well, at the same time, these same individuals who are setting these rules and enforcing these rules upon you are living on high salaries, which apparently are paid by us. Doesn't make sense, does it? So why did I say we're a slave? Well, a perfect example is pull out your driver's license. It identifies you by capital name. A capital name definition is a word mark. It's a trademark. How could you possibly be a trademark? Last time you looked in the mirror, you're a natural man or a natural woman. You're not an artificial entity. And this is where the whole system for them falls. If you stand and hold your standing in legal terms as the beneficiary or the benefactor of that capital name. And it doesn't necessarily have to be all capitals either. So long as they're using your surname, they're implying, or their presumption is, that's who they're doing business with. And you have to make it very clear, that's not you. And by doing that, you are your middle You are your first and middle name. You are not the surname. The surname they use is to steal from you. And the only two things they need from you, or three things actually, is one, you have to answer to that name, the surname. Two is your signature. If you sign something and you don't reserve your rights, then you have none, and they can do whatever they want to. They can throw you in jail, they can call you before the courts, they can force you to pay their bullshit fines and stuff and their court costs and everything. It's because you joined it as a living, natural man or woman. You've joined it with the artificial entity. Now they have a heart. Remember the old the Wizard of Oz show? The Tin Man, the Straw Man, the Lion. It's telling us what we should not be, and also what we should be. So be very clear in your mind whenever you're doing commerce with the Australian government, when you're doing commerce with the state government, when you do commerce with the local government. They never, ever, never refer to you as the natural man or woman. In their eyes, in their presumptions, they'll always take the stand or presumption that you are their slave, their employee. And if that's the case, and you conduct yourself accordingly as their slave and as their employee, then every statute, every act, every mandate, every rule that they force on you, you are bound by it. Right or wrong, they have the legitimacy to do that because you agree. Unconsciously, you agree because you did not learn what your rights are. And we have unalienable rights, inalienable rights, we have the Bill of Rights, and we have the Privacy Act. So how do we navigate through their false economy? And what I mean by false economy is the UCC, Maritime International Commerce. It was designed, created by America. It's been adopted by nearly every country on the planet. And it was designed so that foreign countries can do business with each other because as they are corporations. They are not living entities. They are corporations and trusts, banks. So what we do is, to navigate through that, is we need to understand a little bit more about what the UCC is, the Uniform Commercial Code. It's available on the internet, you can have a read of it. If you read section 3, so UCC 3, the interesting chapters to read, sections are UCC 3-501 to 505. But my favourite is UCC 3-603. And I'll get back to that one in a minute. But so you understand the tender being used in this country, what we deem as currency. You need to understand that it is a maritime trade practice, and they brought it onto the land, which means they've usurped our unalienable rights, they've usurped our Constitution, 1901, they've usurped our common law, which makes us their slave, makes us their employee. So we're forced and controlled by their legislation that they make up for themselves. So they keep control and superiority over us. With a bill of exchange, we use that to navigate purely to settle and discharge a debt that's been made against a trust entity which has a similar name to yours, but it's not the same. So don't be that artificial entity. Your name, your signature, very important to you. Don't give it up. Don't use them. If you're not happy with the offer they give you, which is, again, would be a bill in the mail, which was fraudulently created. It's not correctly filled out properly for the natural man or woman to accept. Just keep those things in mind. You have two choices. You can disagree and not accept or contract, or you can use a bill of exchange and assist them to acquire that amount of money that they're seeking. Now, there's a few things in there which I can broad out a little bit more, but we'll just do with the money amount they seek on that bill. If you ever noticed, for example, you receive a bill for $200, the $200 is a positive amount. So if the account has a positive $200 already on it, what are they asking you to pay? Because if they force you to pay $200 out of your pocket, then the account is $400 in it. Think about that. Basic maths. Now, wouldn't it be more appropriate if that same bill for $200 came to you in the mail as a minus $200, and they force you to pay $200 out of your pocket? The account balance is zero. Now let's remind ourselves that that statement, what they call a bill, which is not a true bill, which they didn't sign or even put their own name on there, came to you as a positive amount, and it was sent to their creation, their fiction, that has a similar name to you, but it's not yours, it's not you. That name is the SESQV Trust. That SESQV Trust was created 1666, and it's been with us through all generations, your whole family's generations, to this day. That trust has been created from your birth certificate, making you a fictional entity, not a real living natural man or woman. They've made you through their education system, through their statutes, which only apply to fiction. They've made you believe that you have an obligation to do what they tell you and what they force you to pay. Remember, if you don't understand your rights, if you don't believe you have rights, then you have none. Remember, the onus is on them to prove you're guilty of something, anything. It's not your job to assist their case against yourself. You have the right to remain silent, always. You have the right to not answer questions, always. You have the right not to sign your name anywhere on anything, always. That's how you navigate through their maritime law, their commerce, and that's how you use the tender process, because you're tendering a bill of exchange to settle and discharge a debt that was created by a corporation, whether it be government or civil, in an environment, in an economy that is bankrupt since 1966. Therefore, the reason it's a positive amount on your bill is because it's not your debt. They need you to endorse it, being the living flesh and blood beneficiary of that fictional entity. They need you to sign it so that the Federal Reserve Bank clears the debt against your SQV trust. And there in itself, I just described to you what the con is. If you understand that, you shouldn't be paying any bill. The country's bankrupt. Then the Federal Reserve Bank meets the debt, not you. How do we navigate using the bills of exchange? First of all, you have to understand who you are in the big picture. The difference between a creditor and a debtor. The reality is, the true meaning, the true law, is that you're the credit. And you're the credit. And the evidence of that is the birth certificate. Because without you, flesh and blood, they can't borrow off your essence. They can't borrow or take your energy. They need you to joinder to their false entity so that you're one and the same. And once you're one and the same, you pay. So you have to keep yourself separate. So the difference between a creditor is the born man and woman. The debtor is the entity that they created. But from the moment you were born, with the help of your parents and your employers throughout your life, and your accountants, and police, and the courts, ensure that you don't learn this, and that you only know that you are the debtor, not the creditor. And as the debtor, in their system, in their world, they are the creditor. You owe them. And that's about as simple as it gets with credit and debit, if you understand those facts. And that's all links back to your SQV trust. Remember I mentioned the birth certificate. That is a bond. That's a bond, an insurance bond or an investment bond, whatever you want to call it. It's a proper bond that they create to create the SQV trust, which administers your buying, selling, administers your property, administers everything. Hence why we, the older in the population, recognise the difference between what they're doing to us today and what it was like back in the 60s. Some of us even back into the 40s still living. But different times, things were done differently. We don't operate today under the Royal Crown, because there is nothing Royal Crown about what they're doing. None of it is under the Constitution. They're not following the operations manual. And they're purposely personating public servants, and they're personating as our government at all levels. And the corporate governments of today have created a monopoly in commerce. In other words, there is no competition. We don't have competition in banks, there's no competition in insurance, there's no competition in anything. It's like communism. You don't have a choice. They make it look like you're having a choice. You have a different choice of different insurance companies. The problem is the legislation these insurance companies follow is the same legislation created by a foreign registered entity personating as our government. And it's their legislation, which makes them an agent of the government. And if you're an agent of the government, then you fall under the same law as a public servant operating in that corporate government legislation. So that is something else to think about the next time you navigate through and understand the bill of exchange is the legal tender. It's the only one in this country. So the next time you receive a silly letter after using a bill of exchange on a bill, and that silly letter says some claim like, we don't accept that method of payment, that instantly tells me, one, they either don't know what they're talking about, two, they're trying to fraud you and trick you into believing that it's not. Unfortunately for them, bills of exchange is the only tender, and there's a 2.5 page of many acts being referenced where it states very clearly that bills of exchange and promissory notes is to be considered as tender, as currency, equal to a dollar note, coins, checks, credit cards. And the next subject to talk about is loans. How is it that we're all paying off credit cards, car loans, mortgages, when the money wasn't made available to us to borrow in the first place? And that it only exists because we were the credit. So we're actually borrowing from ourselves. And their system is designed to make it look like, or make us believe, they lent us something and they never lent us anything. Because it's a promissory note. It's just merely an accounting, money in, money out. So it's an accounting process that they're keeping. There's no actual physical dollar value or dollar, silver or gold currency actually being exchanged from one party to the next. It doesn't exist. It's a IOU, like no different than if you promise to pay someone else and you give them an IOU. That's exactly what a promissory note and a bill of exchange is. They're all IOUs. It comes from your SQV trust. They didn't physically put their hand in their safe and hand over the money to the other partner. They did a promissory note. So when they say they don't accept that method of payment, the problem is they have to accept it. The very Bill of Exchange Act and the UCC 3603, very important, because it says very clearly, without any other definition or determination what it means, and that is, if they do not accept when you endorse one of their bills, then by default the matter is settled and discharged. You don't have to prove it. The law says that's how tendering, that's how bills of exchange operates. It works in our favour, not theirs. They're broke, remember? They're trading bankrupt. That's against the law. They're trading with a monopoly in commerce. That's against the law. They're following and enforcing their legislation, their rules, which is only for C. So in my terms, in my understanding of everything is they are raping and pillaging. It's piracy of the sea being conducted on the land against we, the people. Remember the preamble, the Constitution? Whereas we, the people of all the state, united as one, indissoluble, meaning they can't change that. We, the people, are the government. We, the people, are the law. We, the people, are the boss. We hold superior jurisdiction on the land. The last time I looked, I live on the land. I'm not a fish. And I'm not on a ship on the ocean either. But that's what they like you to believe. They want you to believe you're on their ship. Every document they mail you is a vessel with no ship's master registered on it. So next time you think about paying a bill, maybe you should do some research a little and understand who is it they're billing, who signed it so that they have clean hands and aren't committing perjury. Because you remember they sent it through the mail, Australia Post. It holds High Court jurisdiction and they're conducting fraudulent business using the postal service against you. One of equal share of we the people on the land here, protected by the Royal Crown and the common law of England, not Australia government, not state government, certainly not local government.